You're listening to JoCo's One Small Step, a podcast framework provided by National Public Radio's StoryCorps. One Small Step is an effort to remind us of the humanity in everyone, even those with whom we disagree. Each episode brings two Johnson County, Kansas strangers with different political views together to have a conversation. This episode is presented by United Community Services of Johnson County with support from Resurrection, a United Methodist church. In this conversation, we'll hear from Tom and Jon. Tom, a progressive conservative, is a retiree who adopts rescue dogs and enjoys being active in the Johnson County community, where he has lived for almost all his life. Tom has two children with his wife of 42 years, who passed away after a long battle with cancer. He enjoys spending time with his three grandchildren. Tom considers himself an Eisenhower Republican and says the civil rights movement and Vietnam War had huge impacts on his worldview during his high school and college years. Jon is a husband and father of two children who works in digital marketing at a local church. He grew up with a more conservative mindset, but has recently been re-examining his beliefs after a significant life event and is questioning if he fits into one political party. He is married to his high school sweetheart, and they both grew up in Johnson County. After spending time in Nashville, Tennessee, they recently moved back to Johnson County to raise their family here. Let's listen in.
Why did you want to do this interview today?
For one reason, I heard about StoryCorps. I saw a feature on probably 60 Minutes a couple years ago about StoryCorps. It's a fascinating idea, concept, and when I saw the email, I decided to try to participate. And plus, I always wanted to be in the Library of Congress, so.
Yeah, definitely. I'm a huge fan of NPR and StoryCorps, and every time I've heard those different stories, I've felt like it's real. You know, it's just real people giving their real stories, and I'd love to give that a chance as well. So happy to have the opportunity to do it.
Well, good. Jon, I'd like to tell you a little bit about my background. I lived in Johnson County pretty much all my life. I was born here. The big thing that was influential in my life was the Civil Rights Movement and the Vietnam War. They were both going on when I was in high school, and it was a big influence on my life. And politically, I always described myself as an Eisenhower Republican. So he was it was called sort of progressive conservatism. Mm-hmm. So more progressive on social issues, conservative on economic issues. So,
yeah, I'm interested more in the Eisenhower. You explained a little bit of what that means, but I'm not as familiar with that. So, what is it that you like and don't like?
Well, Eisenhower, when he was president, he pushed social issues a lot. He started the process of racial integration as president. He pushed on Social Security, increased the program. But he was also involved with the largest infrastructure program after World War II in the interstate highway system. Mm-hmm. But he was also conservative. I mean, the highest tax rate under his administration was like 90%. Mm. And so his administration basically helped pay off World War II, helped rebuild Europe, and did this whole infrastructure program. So it's like combining both progression socially and building up and paying off debt. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But you got a lot from that infrastructure, and right now it's all falling apart. Right. And we have to do it again. Mm-hmm. Could you tell me a little bit about your life?
Yeah, I was born in the Philippines. My parents were missionaries out there when I was born, and we moved to Kansas City in the Johnson County area when I was 2. So I was definitely, in some ways, I would say I was born and raised in Johnson County too, because I don't remember a whole lot about the Philippines, but it was interesting to hear my parents and my 2 older sisters talk about their experience in the Philippines as missionaries, and graduated here in Johnson County, and also then ended up going to Nashville for college, and ended up raising my family out in Nashville and just moved back a couple years ago. As far as politically, it's been rough since I'm 36. I feel like, politics I didn't have an Eisenhower to see, or even really that it was close enough to even pay attention to. And I've never really been a huge political person. It's kind of like, okay, they'll figure that out kind of thing. But early on, I thought I could get into it and understand it. And now I'm just like, okay, they're going to do what they're going to do. And I don't know that I can figure it all out. So I have a very interesting political view on all things politics because I feel like I can't trust any of it.
Who was the most influential person in your life, and what did they teach you?
That would be my granddad. So he died when I was 13. So I wish I would have had a lot more years with him to learn. But what I learned from him was that you need to learn something new every day. And he just had this excitement about learning and books and learning about different cultures and different people. And when we would get together, so he was a farmer out in Kentucky, so I would go out to Kentucky for a week and just spend it with him. It was just me and him and my grandma learning how to farm. And you would think it would just be about farming that he would like to learn about, but he liked to learn about planes. He liked to learn about business and all sorts of different things. And it's just every time I was with him, I thought, oh, wow, learning can be fun, right? It's not just school. So I saw this 80-year-old man who was just excited to learn, and that's what he taught me. Tom, who was the most influential person in your life, and what did they teach you?
I would have to say the most influential person in my life is the one I spent most of my time with, and that would be my wife. She was just an incredibly strong woman, very intelligent. I came from a very conservative family, and she sort of opened my eyes to a lot of things. She was a great parent, great mother, great wife, but she always wanted to continue to learn more. So, she went to college for one semester, then just dropped out and then became a dental hygienist. And then we got married. We immediately started having children. And we both worked in the insurance industry. And we sort of learned from each other since we worked in the same industry. And then when my kids were through school, she went back to college. And not only did she get her college degree, she went on and got her executive MBA. And her incredible energy level, her strength. And then when she was hit with cancer at stage 4, when it was diagnosed, what she went through, it just amazed me. Because no matter what chemo she was going through or how she felt, every 3 months she got on a plane to San Diego to see her grandkids. And I'm just amazed at what she was able to do. And I wake up every day thinking, if she was that strong, I got to be strong too for my grandkids. So
Wow.
that's what I learned from. That was the most influential person. John, do you ever feel misunderstood by people with different beliefs than you? Like people from the other side of the aisle?
Yeah. Well, I feel like people have very strong opinions, on things for sure. And when I try to meet in the middle, in a sense, it gets a little bit like I'm lukewarm, and they feel like I don't really have an opinion, and so my opinion doesn't matter if I'm trying to bring people together. And if you don't have a strong stance and you don't know exactly what you believe in, and you don't say this is what's right and this is exactly how you're supposed to do it, then people just see you as kind of a flippy floppy person. And I feel like growing up, I was like you, raised conservative, very conservative, and throughout the years have tried to kind of move more into a middle ground type thing. But my conservative friends feel like I've just kind of become not a very strong person, just kind of a weak person who's willing to give in to the next social fad. And that's kind of frustrating to me.
That's interesting. Do you feel that they've abandoned you?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a little bit like they don't respect me, or they think that I'm just taking the easy way out because I'm, supporting things that they wouldn't support, and they think I'm just kind of going with the next shiny object.
Well, I don't really feel misunderstood. I would used to be part of a Saturday morning breakfast group, and most of the men were conservative. But what was frustrating, we would discuss various political or social subjects, and I never felt like I was misunderstood. They understood where I stood. It's just that they didn't believe what I believed in.
Mm-hmm.
What got frustrating is that they would turn to name calling, and that was a complete turnoff for me.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that I was misunderstood. It's just, if you can't make your point without name calling, then it's just a big turnoff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you feel like there was a time when, because you started off kind of conservative, where you would have been in that camp of name calling people who thought differently than you?
This is a strange belief, but I believe when you're born with a predisposition to look at the world either conservatively or liberally. And then your life experiences will probably reinforce that worldview. So I've always looked at the world in more liberal worldview. And my parents would always look at it conservative worldview. We never really had any conflicts when I was growing up over that. But my worldview was always trying to find ground zero for whatever it was. So whatever the issue was, I always wanted, how did this all start? Where do you go to find the ground zero? And if you're conservative, sometimes you just don't go to the ground zero. You just go with whatever you're feeling or whatever the opinion is.
Yeah. Well, unless you get to the point where you have to go to ground zero.
Yes.
So one part of my story is one of the reasons why we moved from Nashville to Kansas City. This is going to sound odd because I grew up in Kansas City, but in Nashville, we were actually hit by that tornado that went through in March 3rd, 2020, and it was a direct hit. It was an EF3, and there was no basement, right? So we're just, me and my family huddled down.
So you were in the area?
We were in the direct line, and it destroyed everything.
Oh, wow.
And luckily, we weren't hurt by it, but in that moment, after something like that, see, I think before going up to that point, I always, like you said, I didn't really look for ground zero. I was more conservative. Everything just kind of made sense, and it was in this little box. And then after something like that, you start to really wonder about so many more things and wonder if your position on certain things really mattered, and if everything really fit in that small little box that you had, if that was, really how life worked. And I feel like sometimes when you hit that traumatic moment of losing everything or almost losing your life, I was at the point where I was on top of my 8-year-old daughter, and I could feel the tornado sucking me out, and I was kind of ready to just let go and just, that was kind of going to be the end of it. And then it stopped, and it was all done, and I was okay. And, you kind of go from something like that, and you're thinking, all right, I'm getting my life back together, but also my whole belief system is shattered now. And where do I go? And when I went to people who thought a certain way and said, well, God sent this tornado to your family for this specific reason, I'm like, I don't know if that's true, So it's just those kinds of things I think can get us to the point. So I don't believe I was born to think liberally or to think in a certain direction. I think, or maybe I was born to a certain extent, and then when the rubber hit the road or something happened in my life, like you said, like life experience will change the way that you think, and mine was a drastic 180
Yes, it
change.
was.
Yeah.
How did that affect your religious beliefs?
A much bigger understanding of God than I ever had, because there was a lot of questions that couldn't be answered, and I had to be okay with that, or I had to throw it all out. But I chose to be okay with the mystery, with the mystery of life, and just, that things happen, and it's really hard to understand.
Yeah, it's interesting. I asked that question because probably 2-3 months before my wife passed away, she was bedridden a lot, and she was making contact with her old cousins and relatives and old friends and trying to make contact on social media. And social media is good for certain things. Sometimes it's not. And she read a post of one of her coworkers who had breast cancer, and she went into remission. And all these comments about this coworker that went into remission was, praise God, God is the greatest. Right. And I told you that she was strong, but this was the one weak moment that I ever saw her, and she says, why didn't God save me?
That's right.
And that has shaken my belief system.
That's right.
And these life experiences are just, can be tough.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And it is something that when we're in those moments where we're trying to consult people or we're trying to encourage people by, like a lot of people would say when we didn't get hurt by the tornado, they say, oh, wow, God really saved you. And I said, well, are we going to say that to the person 2 blocks down the
That's
road
right.
who lost their 5-year-old, and I didn't do anything special or different from them to be able to survive. And your wife didn't do anything special or different not to survive, or her coworker.
That's right.
But that's very hard to understand.
And because you don't see on social media when somebody passes away, you don't see somebody saying, God is great.
Right. Right.
And it's just, why not? I mean, he's still great.
I mean, I would be interested, but you may not feel comfortable because it's your kids' stories, but...
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Ask.
Okay. I'm interested how your kids are, what their viewpoints have been and how you raised them and kind of where everything falls there.
That's a good question. My wife and I, we were like a perfect match because we would think the same. We would always anticipate actions. So when it came to raising our kids, we were in total agreement. And it was like, give them the most opportunities to explore and learn so they can find what they're meant to do. Because I believe everybody is meant to do something. You're given certain talents. The trick is finding them. And we just let the kids explore and let them find. And what I found shocking is, my daughter was the oldest. And I remember she came up to me when she was a junior in high school. She was a musician. She says, I know what I want to do with my life. I said, okay, what? I want to become a music professor. Well, she's a music professor now at a university on the East Coast. And when my son was a sophomore in high school, he came up to me and said, I want to get in the hotel business. So he immediately got a job at a new hotel that was opening up. He's still in the hotel business, loves it. But the one thing that both my wife and I stress with the kids growing up is we all eat dinner together every night. No matter what your activities are, we eat dinner together, no matter how early or late. And I can remember a story of my son telling me he was playing basketball one Saturday evening with his friend, and the friend invited him to stay for dinner. He said, no, I can't. I got to go home because we all have dinner together. So we raised our kids so they could find what they were meant to do.
Yeah. Well, and after their mom passed away, do you feel like they were, obviously rattled from everything, or they changed their beliefs, or how do you work through that?
Yes. My daughter is particularly rattled. I really didn't appreciate the mother-daughter bond as much, but my wife's mother died at 53 when she was 18, died in her arms from a heart attack. And I didn't really understand the effect that had on my wife her entire life until she got cancer, and how she wanted her mother. And so I know it's affected my daughter. And it's affected my son, but I don't think he shows it. What really hurts me is that the grandkids don't get to know her. So,
yeah.
So I try to be there for them, try to take on both roles.
Yeah. It's interesting how things like that bring us together because we want to be closer and support each other.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a 10-year-old daughter and a 7-year-old son, so kind of that same thing, right? Where you have this relationship with both that are a little different, but I can't imagine that mother-daughter relationship is really strong, and that must be hard.
Sometimes we just don't go that extra mile to try to understand what people are going through.
Mm-hmm.
Another reason
Yeah.
I kind of like StoryCorps.
Right, absolutely, yeah, because it's so easy to get wrapped up in what we want and where we're headed. And a big part of why we were out in Nashville, honestly, was to go after my wife's songwriting career, which was not a bad thing. It was fun, but it takes a lot, and you're very invested in that. And so, you get going on something like that, and then a traumatic thing happens, and all you want to do is be back next to family,
Yes.
right? Because
That's right.
that's what's so important. And it doesn't matter what you're going after. It doesn't matter what you're thinking in the moment is the most important thing. When it really hits the fan, you want to be by family. Sounds like that's what happened with your kids
Yes.
too. Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Yeah.
This is sort of a strange question, whether you want to deal with it or not. With everything that's going on in this country and the world, do you find it stressful? Is there somewhere in the back of your head where it's just constantly wearing on you? Does it affect you physically, emotionally? That people just seem to be going off and not listening to each other?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does bother me when people go on the extremes, and I think it seems like the extremes are the ones who get the most air coverage, and it seems like they're the ones who get the most news media outlets are the extremes. And I just hate to see that much attention drawn to these extreme ideas, and everybody starts thinking that is the majority. And so then they start going and thinking, okay, well, everybody's thinking this way, so I better start thinking this way. And with the way that I'm in digital marketing, and so the way that Facebook works, right, with the algorithms and saying, oh, you like this post, so we're going to show you more of this post. So you like this. And so then you just start to live in your little silo world. And that is why I think I get a little stressed about the idea of, if we continue to keep going apart and just stay in our own little groups where we're all thinking the same, what's going to happen? I mean, it's just, we're divided, and we're just continually getting more and more divided. And so I do think that's stressful to think, especially having young kids who are going to grow up in a society where we just continually get more and more divided. Is not a society I want them to be in, as you can imagine.
Well, I worry about my grandkids, because my grandkids are the same age as your kids.
Yeah.
And I'm concerned about what they think of adults right now.
Right.
Because they aren't ignorant of what's going on. They know what's going on.
Yeah.
And we aren't necessarily setting good examples for them.
Right.
And that bothers me.
Yeah. What concerns you most about the future?
What concerns me most about the future, and I say this jokingly, is that I won't be here for a lot of it because of my age. But my concern is, it is for my grandkids, and worrying that they might not have the life I enjoyed. And what do you do as a grandparent? I just try to be there for them, be at all their athletic events, talk to them. But in a wider context, as a retiree, I volunteered at a couple of museums. And in that role, I help educate. So it's fun to have school groups come in from second grade on up, and just try to educate them on history and learning to think for themselves, and try to find why certain things happen the way they did.
So we don't repeat the bad history, in a sense, or
sort of. I don't particularly like the phrase repeating history, but learn from it, because there's really nothing new in human history. We just do it differently. Not necessarily repeating the same, but we'll do it differently. And you've got to learn to always try to find what the truth is. Mm-hmm. And I just try to teach my grandkids that too. So truth and character.
Mm. And is what worries you the digital, the information they can get, the false information they can get?
The false information. My daughter-in-law and son are just terrified of drugs, especially now with the fentanyl that's looking like Skittles and stuff. And to be a parent today, you know, you're terrified of some of these things, and you try to keep track of everything for them. You try to track their social media, etc., and you just don't know when they're away from you what they're tempted with. Mm-hmm.
A lot of options out
there. There's a lot more options than when I was a kid.
Yeah. What are the things that you're worried that your grandkids are going to miss out on?
And this is going to sound strange, but downtime to reflect and to think.
Yeah, being bored, kind of.
Just being bored because they're constantly having an electronic device, or they're constantly in communication with a friend through these devices. Mm-hmm. There's no downtime. Their activities outside of school are just every evening. I'm worried about one of the granddaughters. I mean, I think she's mentally fatigued at age 10 from playing sports because they don't take time to just relax and read. Mm-hmm. I'm sounding old-fashioned.
No, I agree with
I'm
you.
worried that they don't have the downtime. I had downtime as a kid, and I read a lot. I mean, I would read every history book in the library as a kid. And those, you know, your only options. You had television, but you only had 3 stations to watch. And they were only on certain times. Sundays, everything was closed except churches and maybe a few gas stations. But everything's 24/7 now.
Yeah. I know my kids say, I'm bored. And I said, that's great. That's a really good, that's exactly where you're going to come up with your best ideas.
Your creativity.
That's right.
When you're bored.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, there's less of a chance to be bored these days. And adults don't mimic we're not very good role models for that.
No, we aren't.
If we're waiting in line for something, we're looking at our phones. If we're, bored or whatever, we're always looking at our phones. And so they're looking at that. It's like, I'm bored, so I need to do what my parents are doing and look at my phone. And
I can't imagine taking a kid on a road trip these days because they might get bored.
Right. Yeah, we actually bought the old-fashioned Discmans, so where they just put the CD in there and had our kids use those. It was hard to find. We had to go to like a specialty store to be able to find these old Discmans, and then from the library got old like audiobooks or just old-fashioned music that they could pop in so they could just listen to it and look out the window instead of being glued to a screen the whole time. Because how many times when I was driving around would I just listen to music and look outside when I was a kid and come up with ideas and dream and be creative. And for our kids these days, they don't need that. They can just watch a movie while they're driving. So I agree with you. I think the boredom is something that it sounds odd to say, but that we need to bring back. I will say with technology, as a parent, my biggest confliction is it's important for them to understand technology so they can do their job.
Yes.
And it's important for them to be in sports a lot of times because they need to learn how to work in teams and they need to learn how to manage a schedule. But like at what time does that make sense? And then if we hold them back from that, are they going to be behind? And so as a parent, you're always worried about that. It's like, okay, well, we could go move out into the country and not have any sports or any technology or anything. And then by the time that they're supposed to be out there contributing to society, it's like, are they going to be prepared? And so that balance of not giving them too much technology, but giving them enough to be able to function in this new world is hard. And technology is a good thing, like in some
Oh,
ways,
yeah, it
right?
is.
It helps you figure out things faster. And I mean, think about all the encyclopedias that we used to have that we don't have to have
Or the
anymore.
card catalog.
Yeah, yeah, Rolodex and all those good things
Yes.
that is all in the palm of our hand now. Have you ever lost a friendship over a disagreement?
Probably in the past few years, I have lost a friendship. I knew this person was always conservative. She would, we would banter back and forth. She knew I was liberal. I knew she was conservative. But the past few years, it got more critical, the friendship, because she was listening to, it was like these podcasts almost all the time. She would listen to them in the evening. She would actually find time at work to listen to them. They were usually either right-wing political commentators or evangelical pastors. And we would get into these discussions. And, I appreciated her viewpoint, but she became critical of mine. So she would criticize what I was reading or what I was viewing. But when she started to go off on, let's say, Christian nationalism, and I would try to get to the factual part of that, and she just wouldn't listen. Because, in fact, I lost it. Because that's just something that just, if you're not paying attention to the facts, it kind of gets under my skin. And basically, the friendship ended over that because we just got too far apart, and she just didn't want to continue with the friendship.
Yeah,
and I was okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we could not find any common ground whatsoever.
Did you feel like you could just not talk about politics, or so much of the relationship was about politics that
The problem is constantly listening to the podcasts.
right?
It was hard to have a conversation.
Yeah, because that was all what was in her mind and all she wanted to talk about, kind of thing.
Or constantly being on the phone and texting.
Yeah.
So, but that's where political and real differences in political and religious viewpoints, that friendship ended because of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I know I had a group of friends that were into listening to a lot of talk radio, like you mentioned, and the topics always wanted to come up, and for whatever reason, it was while I was driving in the car. So this was a group that I worked with, some colleagues of mine, a few years ago, and every time we jumped in the car to go to lunch together, there was about 4 guys in there, and they all shared the same ideas that were very different than mine, and they all wanted to start talking about them and get going on it. So I just would pipe up and say, rule in this car is we don't talk about politics, because I just didn't want to go there. And, I think that's because I felt probably what you were feeling is like, if we go there, sparks are going to fly and probably not going to change their minds on anything. So then the relationship's just going to end. And it's very difficult if you feel like you can't have that clear set, okay, we're not talking about politics, we'll talk about anything else but politics. Sometimes that's just not an option.
Let me ask you a question. If you could change one thing in the political atmosphere today, if you had that power, what would you change?
That's a really good question. To me, it would be that there has to be just true facts. Like everything has to be laid out in the simplest, easiest terms, understandable to the easiest, simplest minds imaginable, right? So that we can actually have opinions that make sense, because everything is so complicated, and they can pass a bill and then add a whole bunch of other things in there that nobody knew was in there, or they put it in there for certain reasons so people would vote no, and then they could say they voted no on something that was really important. And it's just like all those games. I wish there was more rules set so that it wasn't such a messy and tricky business to be in.
Well, I agree with you on the facts, that part of it. If I had the power, I would just like to limit, number one, the money that goes into political campaigns, and number two, shorten the political campaign season. So it's like they're constantly working for re-election and begging for money. And they aren't even addressing the problems that we're having today in this country.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of them.
Right.
And they don't seem to be getting addressed.
Yeah.
But I think limiting the money and the campaign season would sure help.
Yeah. Yep. They're not moving from campaign to campaign.
Yes.
Get to do their job, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you learned from our conversation today?
I absolutely learned the importance of marriage and just remembering what I have. Hearing you talk about your wife, it reminds me of how important building that strong family foundation that you and your wife built for your family is. And I'm sure you had your rough times too, but it's just incredible to see your passion and your love for your wife, and that really touched me.
Well, one thing I learned today is, number one, I don't ever really get the opportunity to talk to somebody one-on-one that's half my age.
Right.
Because we really tend to segregate in our society. We segregate by age, we segregate a lot by race, economic class, and we don't often be able to cross lines like that. So what I learned today was I can carry on a conversation with somebody half my age and know what they're talking about.
Right. That's good.
And I appreciate seeing your views on raising a family today, because I know what my son's going through today. But I just wanted to, sort of verify, somebody else is going through similar issues as he is, and how you're dealing with those. And that gives me hope
Yeah.
for the future.
I love that. Well, I've really enjoyed our conversation. This was great, and I feel like we're two Johnson County boys who just, grew up in Kansas, and but have had different and similar lives. I mean, having kids who are a boy and a girl, and that type of thing. It's cool to see the similarities we have, but also I feel like we're different in the way that we approach politics and those types of things, not necessarily on what side of the aisle, but I know that you really enjoy facts and you enjoy fully understanding everything, and I'm like on this camp of like, this is too much, and I'm just like, whatever, we're just not going to talk about it. So I've enjoyed hearing your thoughts on that.
I just found it really enjoyable and fascinating, and really would like to see more people do this.
Yeah.
Because you'll learn a lot about yourself in the process as well. And it was good to meet you, and know that we have a lot in common.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for listening to this One Small Step conversation presented by United Community Services of Johnson County. UCS provides data analysis, collaborative planning, and resources to enhance the availability and delivery of health and human services in Johnson County, Kansas. For more information, visit ucsjoco.org. This episode is made possible with support from Resurrection, a United Methodist Church.